All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're tackling something that, on the surface, feels like a total contradiction. Being a devout Christian and, at the same time, identifying as a Therian. How can those two worlds possibly coexist? We're going to get into it. So this is the big question, right? How can a person be deeply committed to their faith while also having this profound internal connection to an animal? It's this really fascinating collision of belief and a very unique personal experience. Okay, so chances are you've seen this stuff online. The masks, the tails, the viral videos of people running on all fours, what's called quadrupeds. But according to the source material we're looking at today, what you see on the outside, that's not the whole story. Not even close. To really get it, you have to look deeper. So, here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll get a clear definition of what a Therian actually is. Then, we'll tackle some of the biggest myths out there. After that, we'll dive into the inner experience, see how identity plays into it, and finally, circle back to what those expressions you see online are all about. All right, first things first. What is a Therian, really? Let's move beyond the visuals for a minute and get to the core of it. So, the core definition is this. Therianthropy is the experience of involuntarily identifying with a non-human animal on a non-physical level. Now, those two words, involuntary and non-physical, are absolutely key here. This isn't someone deciding one morning, hey, I think I'll be a wolf today. And it's definitely not a belief that they are literally physically an animal. It's described as an internal thing that just is. So with that definition in our back pocket, it's the perfect time to bust some of the biggest myths you hear out there. Separate the facts from the online fiction. Myth number 1, and this is a huge one, that Therians believe they are actually physically animals. Nope. Our source is super clear about this. They are fully aware they're human. The whole experience is internal, it's psychological, it's got nothing to do with denying physical reality. Okay, next up, the furry fandom. People get these two mixed up all the time. And yeah, someone can totally be part of both, but they are fundamentally different things. Think of it this way. The furry fandom is a hobby. It's an interest in art and characters. Therianthropy, on the other hand, is described as this deep, involuntary, personal experience. One is something you do, the other is something you feel you are. And then there's the litter box rumor. I'm sure you've heard this one. Yeah, according to our source, that's completely false. It's a widely debunked rumor that they say comes from political games and, well, just plain old internet bullying. It has nothing to do with the actual Therian community. Okay, so if it's not about physically being an animal, then what does it actually feel like on the inside? Well, our source breaks the inner experience down into two main ideas called shifts. First up is what's called a mental shift. This is basically when your whole mental state kind of switches gears. Your mindset, your thoughts, they start to feel much more aligned with how an animal might think or perceive the world. And our source, Silveria, puts this in a really personal way. They said that before they even had a name for it, all I knew up until that point was that sometimes my brain would think that it was an animal brain. I mean, that really paints a picture of what that raw and maybe even confusing feeling is like. The second type of shift is called a phantom shift, and this is fascinating. It's the distinct sensation of feeling body parts that aren't actually there, like a tail or ears or even wings. It's actually a lot like the phantom limb phenomenon that people who've had amputations sometimes experience. Yeah. As the source describes it, it's about literally feeling non-existent parts like ears, a tail, wings, even fur. So we're talking about a sensory experience, not just a passing thought. So this brings us right to the heart of our whole explainer. How does this super personal internal experience mesh with Christian faith? This is where everything connects. So where's the real tension here? Well, for a lot of people, the idea of having an animal identity just doesn't seem to fit with a faith that really emphasizes the unique soul of a human being. So how do you reconcile that? What's the solution? According to our source, it all boils down to one simple but really powerful word: identity. The real discussion isn't about behaviors or phantom tales. It's about what you believe defines you, deep down at your very core. And here's the perspective they offer. The argument is that, as a Christian, the absolute foundation of your identity is rooted in Christ. Therianthropy, then, isn't
the identity, it's just a part of their identity. You see the difference? It's a piece of who they are, but it's not the bedrock.
This leads to a really important distinction in language. It's the difference between identifying as an animal versus identifying with one. Saying you identify as something kind of suggests that's your entire core being. But identifying with something, that suggests you relate to it, you share traits or a connection with it. And from this perspective, that connection is just one more complex, interesting part of the person you were created to be.
Okay, so now that we've unpacked the internal side of things, let's go back to where we started, what we actually see on the outside. The masks, the quadribikes, all of that. So the gear, the masks, tails, and so on, is often described as a way to express this part of themselves. For some, it can also help manage something called species dysphoria, which is this deep feeling of sadness or disconnect. As for quadrobics, it's presented as a really demanding physical sport. But here's the main takeaway. None of this is mandatory. And it's not about rejecting your humanity. And you can tell quadrupedics is treated like a real sport by the advice given for practicing it safely. You have to build stamina, you have to stretch properly with dynamic stretches, not just holding a pose. And most importantly, you have to listen to your body so you don't get hurt. It's treated as a serious physical discipline. So when you put it all together, the perspective we've explored today is really about a journey of self-understanding. It's about figuring out the difference between your involuntary experiences, the different parts of your personality, and the core identity that you choose to build your life around. And that kind of leaves us all with a pretty big question to think about, doesn't it? In our own lives, with all our own complexities, how do we draw those lines for ourselves?